Welcome back. Well, introducing a new segment today. Drum roll, please. It's called Optics and Impact, featuring two major players in the worlds of communication, strategy, and polling. Jennifer Stewart of Syntax Strategic and CTV pollster Nik Nanos will be here every Thursday to look at the week's developments on the campaign trail and what that's doing to the polling numbers. The campaign hasn't officially started yet, but it sure is a lot of campaigning out there. So let's get started a little early. Welcome.
Absolutely.
All right, let's rock and roll. I got to ask you about the NDP. We've been talking about them a lot.
Yep.
Mostly negative, but you know, it looks like today they had a pretty good ad out of Quebec. You know, sort of dealing with the whole turban issue from Jagmeet Singh, and now we're finding out that these defections weren't totally a defection situation. How grim are things for the NDP now, and could they bounce back from having these low expectations to surprise a lot of people yet?
It's always good to be the underdog, right? Mm-hmm. And Jagmeet Singh has certainly been that in this scenario. And I think he hasn't shown much personality to date. So I think he actually has an opportunity to say, hey, you know, I'm not going to tolerate racism. I'm going to be true to my convictions. I'm going to wear my turban in an ad that's going to play in Quebec. And, you know, particularly with what's happening south of the border with Trump, having a pillar of somebody that's not going to tolerate racism, I think is going to play well for him. So I think he can turn this around. I think the fact that these candidates are, you know, electing to go green and they've made racist remarks is actually going to work in his favor, because it's not about this election, because I don't think he stands a chance in this election. It's about his brand going forward, and he can rebuild that, but he needs some personality and pizzazz.
Do the Greens take a bit of a hit for this? Because really they're kind of innocent in the sense that they didn't solicit these people to come across. They suddenly said they were joining him. Elizabeth May's going, okay, and now it turns out there might be some taint to those.
I think she needs to take action. If they've actually made racist comments, I mean, what's going to be interesting in this election is not who comes first or second, but who comes third. And May has that ability to build that momentum and really position the Greens for 4 years from now. So she can't suffer kind of short-term blinders and say, yeah, everybody in the camp, let's fill all the ridings and let's go. She needs to have that long-term perspective. So absolutely, cut it.
We haven't had this before, have we, Nick? A battle for third.
No,
really.
No, exactly. And that's what makes this really interesting, because it includes the dynamic between the New Democrats and the Greens. You know, for Jagmeet Singh, you know, he's got to somehow cut through the clutter. And, you know, there are so many other interesting things, you know, with a lot of focus on Andrew Scheer and Justin Trudeau and Elizabeth May. He has to differentiate himself on vision and to make things interesting, because, you know, the thing is it's a very crowded stage with very large personalities. And we really haven't seen, we have to see more of a vision. I think that's what Canadians want. How are the NDP different from the Liberals? Because the Liberals have done a pretty good job at eating the NDP lunch, breakfast, dinner,
like
snack time, you know, all that kind of stuff, right? You know, and so the NDP really have to differentiate themselves, I think, because for a lot of progressive voters, it's like, okay, well, we could vote for the NDP, we like Jagmeet Singh, but we've already got a government that's pretty progressive.
One of the strategies that's come out, and I'm talking about this in my last word a little later in the show, but the whole idea of the Liberals rolling out these, they're not really attack ads. They are going back in history to grab clips of Andrew Scheer to sort of try and show his social conservative roots and some of his, how he's personally got some beliefs that might be out of sync with the way Canadians are thinking in the mainstream. And I'm trying to get a handle on whether you think that is an effective campaign strategy by the Liberals, or is it going to be seen as a bit of a cheap shot to go back, in some cases, 15 years to drag video out?
So I've got a twofold answer. I thought it was a cheap shot until I saw Scheer's response. He waited days to respond to this.
6, I think. But
6 days. Good clarification, Don. And, you know, I thought that was an absolute weak point, and it's going to be his Achilles heel. Look, he needs to be right of center. He needs to be focused on the economy. If he has to lose that base that holds so tightly onto those values to Bernier, so be it, because you're positioning yourself for the future. And he really failed to do that. I mean, he eventually came out and said, you know, we wouldn't open up these issues. That's fine. But he took so long to kind of address that he really gave the Liberals some wind in their sails by bringing back these videos, which initially I would have said was a really poor tactic. And if I were advising Scheer, you need to be focused on the economy, right of center, you know, fiscally conservative and socially progressive. And people are left wondering, is he? And I'm afraid the results are going to be, I mean, not personally, but the devil you know versus the devil you don't, because people are trying to kind of guess where, you know, what is his position on these issues.
Could be damaging to him, Nick.
Yeah, big surprise. The Liberals opted for the sheer schmear. How's that?
Whoa, say that five times.
No, but the thing is, a big surprise. Actually, the Liberals have done this on a number of occasions and attempted it. They weren't very successful with Stephen Harper. When Stephen Harper was dealt with the same kind of thing, he basically knocked it out of the park and turned it around and basically put a spike into it. And then the Liberals went on to talk about something else. And so I think that's what people would expect any leader.
Right.
Regardless of whatever party they're from, they expect any leader that if they were attacked, that they would have an immediate response to say, hey, that's the past. Let's talk about the future. Where are jobs going to come from? How do we have a living wage? What's Canada's future? That's what we want to talk about. And it doesn't take any time. It shouldn't take any time to have that response. That should come naturally. Yeah. So I think it was a bit of a head scratcher as to why it took so long. Then again, 6 days, people might gripe, but that's inside baseball. What's important now is that when the writ is dropped and the election starts, he cannot do that again. He's got to be on and quickly respond.
Well, speaking of the writ dropping, one thing that stops when the writ drops is spending. The federal government loses the ability to, and they've been literally a fire hose of funding announcements coming out of this government. My friend David Aiken tracks his stuff, and he's like, in August, there was like billions of dollars, hundreds and hundreds of these events. And I'm curious, do voters look at those and say, oh, it's so great the government's helping us funding this, dock or whatever it is in their community? Or do they go, hey, this is just politicians showing up with a check trying to buy my votes? How does it play out to you?
Well, to me personally, we're supposed to balance the books. We've got the U.S.-China trade war. We're potentially back in 2008 in terms of our economy. From my perspective, we now have a big deficit. So I think it's a detriment. I understand there's a regional play here in terms of affiliating themselves with these communities, particularly in Atlantic Canada, as you well know, Nick. But overall, I don't think it sets the right tone, right? There's so much turbulence right now globally with potential ramifications for Canada that going out and spending to buy votes, which will be kind of some of the optics of this, I don't think is the right approach.
But let's set aside whether this is good public policy, which is what you're talking about. It is an effective media tactic because for any government, which is why they do this, if you put these types of items in the news, it crowds out the other opposition parties and it also crowds out bad news. So what the Liberals are doing is trying to jam anything into the news so that people are not focused on the ethics commissioner, not focused on anxiety about the future strength of the Canadian economy, not focused on carbon taxes, not focused on any of that. So I think tactically, it's very understandable what the Liberals are doing.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think that tactic is becoming transparent. I think back in the day when we didn't have social media, we weren't really focused on the economy as much as we are now. It worked, and you got regional play and regional newspapers where people consume their news. But now we've got less regional newspapers. People are consuming their news on Twitter, national television, different sources, and I think that tactic needs to be reviewed because traditionally, yes, it works, but I'm not sure if it works in this current landscape.
I don't know if this qualifies as an optic or not. I'm curious, like the tactic of holding off on giving the starting gun sounding, the dropping of the writ to make this campaign start. A long campaign hurt an incumbent? Nick, is there a rule of thumb whether you should, if you're an incumbent exposed to having a record that's going to be under attack, you keep the campaign as short as possible, or can you afford?
Well, I think Stephen Harper thought that a long campaign would be good for him, and it wasn't. The long campaign in 2015 gave Justin Trudeau the runway to day in, day out, grind it and not make any mistakes. And he basically demonstrated that he was not as risky as the Conservatives tried to portray him. But I think right now the reality is, what's a long campaign? It's going to be 1 week longer or shorter than what it is right now. The campaign is the campaign. People will tune in once the writ is dropped. And the big weekend to watch is going to be Thanksgiving weekend, because in all of our polling, the numbers usually kind of firm up or move after the holiday gathering. People
talking turkey.
They're talking turkey, political turkey,
No
and real turkey, and decide on the future of political careers.
All right, that was fun. First segment. We'll see you guys next Thursday. Thanks for coming. Appreciate this.